In this lesson, we are going to learn what a complex fraction is and then how to simplify one. A complex fraction is basically a fraction within another fraction. So I'll just throw some easy examples that you might have seen years ago. 1/2 divided by 3. So there's a fraction of a half within the fraction of this top over bottom. Or 2 divided by 1/3. That's a complex fraction. But we're not going to deal with these types of complex fractions. We're going to deal with things that look like this. So there's a fraction, and then here's a whole nother fraction right there. So what are we going to do to simplify these complex fractions? Well, the first thing we're going to do is we are going to deal with the numerator as an individual problem. We're going to do the same thing with the denominator. So in essence, when you see a complex rational expression, what you're going to do is you're going to treat them as three separate problems within the same problem. So you're going to treat the numerator as a problem in itself. Then you're going to move on to the denominator, treat that as a problem within itself. And then you're going to come back to the original problem and you're going to have a numerator and a denominator. And then you're going to change the division to multiplication, just like we did the last lesson. And then multiply and cancel or reduce. All right, so let's look at that. So again, we're just going to treat the numerator like a separate problem. Just pretend that that's a problem in itself. Then over here, we're going to do the denominator like it's its own separate problem. So let's just deal with this one. Right now, it's over 1. We're trying to add these, but we can't because they don't have the same denominator. So we're going to rewrite them so that they do have the same denominator. Notice that this denominator had to change from 1 to 3, so we had to multiply by 3 to get it to be 3. So then you got to multiply this by 3, and that would become 3x. And now if you add those together, that will give you 4x over 3. Okay, let's move on to the denominator. This denominator is 1. We got to get a common denominator. So same idea, we're going to multiply this by 6 to get it to match. So you're going to multiply this by 6, and that becomes 6x. 6x minus 1x is 5x, all over that common denominator. So now our new numerator is here, and our new denominator is here. So we're going to write that as 4x over 3 over 5x over 6. Now we're going to do what we've done in previous lessons. We're going to change this division to a multiplication. In order to do that, we're going to take this and we're going to flip them upside down. Notice how we flipped it? So now that's gone. So now if we take a look at this, we have 24x over 15x. Now can I reduce that? Yep, these x's will cancel. And then can I reduce 24 over 15? Well, yeah, I can divide both of those by what? 3. And my final answer, if you look at this from the very beginning, my final answer reduced is just 8/5. So take a few minutes and kind of just absorb that and figure out what it is that we just did. All right, so let's look at the numerator here. I can go ahead and factor this denominator, and then those can cancel. And that's all I can really do. Well, let's look at the denominator. This is a monomial and that's a binomial, so our common denominator will be each of those put together right next to each other. The monomial and the binomial combined. So how do I go from this denominator to this denominator? I'm going to have to multiply by x. How do I get from this denominator to this denominator? I multiply by the binomial, which will give me 2x plus 4. There's a plus sign between them. My common denominator doesn't change. But if I add those, I'll get 3x plus 4. Now we're going to put it back together. you have 1 over x plus 2 divided by 3x plus 4 over x plus 2. So you're going to change this to a multiplication by flipping this upside down. And now you're going to look at this and say, okay, is there anything you can cancel, reduce? Yep, these binomials right here. So our final answer would be x in the top part in the numerator, and then your binomial of 3x plus 4 in your denominator. All right, so let's look at our numerator here. There's nothing I can do. Check. Let's look at our denominator. All right, so I'm looking at these denominators that are not the same, so I need to get a common denominator. And these are two completely different binomials, so I'm just going to put those binomials right next to each other because they have to be included in our common denominator. So how do I go from this denominator to this denominator? Well, I'd have to multiply this by x plus 1, and when I multiply that by x plus 1, I'll get x plus 1. How do I go from this denominator to this denominator? Well, I'd have to multiply by that binomial of x minus 4, and when I distribute there, I'll get 3x minus 12. Now, instead of having two separate fractions, we're going to join them together for one fraction. And you're going to get 4x minus 11. All right, so now we've got this numerator here. We're going to put it back together now. Divided by this denominator here. We're going to change this to times, and we're going to flip this upside down. And then we're going to cancel these. Is there anything else I can cancel? So we're going to write down what's left over. Remember at the end we said we don't distribute at the end. And there we go. So the whole idea of a complex fraction is a little bit more intense, but what you're doing is you're taking all the previous lessons that we've done, and those are individual sections of one problem here.